You can remember what you ate for breakfast yesterday. You can remember your first day of school, your first heartbreak, the smell of your childhood home. But you cannot remember being born. You cannot remember your first steps, your first word, the face of the person who fed you in the middle of the night. That entire period of your life is gone. Not blurry, not faded, gone. And the strange part is, it isn't because nothing happened. So much happened. Your brain was learning faster in those first 3 years than it ever will again. So where did it all go? For a long time, scientists assumed babies simply couldn't form memories at all. The brain was too immature, too undeveloped, like a camera with no film inside. But that explanation has a problem. Babies clearly learn. They recognize their mother's voice within days of birth. They learn to crawl, to walk, to speak entire languages. All of that requires memory. So the brain isn't failing to record. Something else is happening. This gap has a name. Psychologists call it infantile amnesia. It refers to the near total inability of adults to recall events from before the age of 2 or 3 and the spotty, fragmented nature of memories even up to age 7. Sigmund Freud was one of the first to write about this phenomenon over a century ago, though his explanation involved repression of early experiences. Modern neuroscience tells a very different and far stranger story. Here's the first piece of the puzzle. Your brain has a structure called the hippocampus. Think of it as the brain's filing system. It doesn't store memories permanently, but it's responsible for taking a moment you experience and converting it into a memory you can retrieve later. In infants, this structure is still under construction. New neurons are being added to it at an extremely high rate during the first years of life. That sounds like it should help, right? More new cells, more memory capacity. But researchers studying this process found the opposite. A study led by neuroscientist Paul Franklin at the Hospital for Sick Children in Toronto found that this rapid neuron growth, called neurogenesis, may actually interfere with old memories rather than support them. In experiments with infant mice, increasing the rate of new neuron growth in the hippocampus made existing memories harder to retrieve. Slowing it down had the opposite effect, helping memories last longer. Picture a corkboard covered in notes. Every new note you pin up pushes the others slightly out of place, overlapping them, burying them. Now imagine someone is pinning up new notes at an explosive rate, every single day, for years. That's roughly what's happening inside an infant's hippocampus. The wiring is being rebuilt so fast and so constantly that the early notes don't get a chance to settle into permanent storage. They get overwritten before they can become long-term memories at all. But neurogenesis isn't the only piece. There's something else missing in early childhood, and it might be even more important. Memory isn't just about storage, it's about retrieval. And retrieval depends on language and a sense of self. Think about how you actually recall a memory. You might think, I remember when I was 7 at my grandmother's house and I dropped my ice cream. That sentence has a narrator. It has a timeline. It has a me inside it, located in a specific place at a specific time. Psychologists call this autobiographical memory, and it requires the brain to have developed a stable concept of self, a sense of I that persists across time. Developmental psychologist Catherine Nelson has spent decades studying how young children talk about their experiences, and her research suggests that this sense of a continuous self doesn't fully emerge until somewhere around age 3 or 4. Before that, a child can have an experience, but they don't yet have the cognitive scaffolding to file it away as something that happened to me, the person I am. Without that scaffolding, even an emotionally intense moment has nowhere to attach. It's like writing a note and never putting a date or a name on it. The information exists, but it can't be filed. There's a third layer to this, and it's the part that connects directly back to that question about what you actually remember. Language. Before children can speak in full sentences, they experience the world primarily through sensation, emotion, and image. Once language develops, something shifts. Children begin encoding experiences verbally, in words and narrative structure. Researcher Gabriel Simcock and colleagues ran a striking experiment on this. They studied toddlers who experienced a novel event before they had learned the specific words to describe it. Later, after the children had developed the vocabulary, The researchers tested whether they could recall the event. The children showed almost no verbal memory of it, even though they had been too young to talk about it, only when they'd actually experienced it. Their nonverbal memory, however, things like recognizing objects from the event, remained intact for a surprisingly long time. The verbal access to the memory simply never formed because the words to encode it didn't exist yet at the time it happened. This is sometimes called the verbal shift. The brain's dominant mode of storing experience changes from something closer to pure sensation and image to something built around language and narrative. And once that shift happens, it becomes very difficult to retrieve memories that were stored in the old format. It's a bit like trying to open a file with the wrong software. The data might technically still be there. You just don't have the program that can read it anymore. So if you put these three pieces together, you start to see why those early years vanish. The hippocampus is rebuilding itself so rapidly that early memories don't get permanently filed. The sense of self needed to organize memories into a personal story hasn't formed yet. And the shift to language-based memory means that even sensations and images from before that shift become almost impossible to access later, even if traces of them are still sitting somewhere in the brain. Here's where it gets stranger. Some researchers believe those early memories aren't actually destroyed. They might just be locked away in a format your adult brain can no longer read. Studies using brain imaging have found that very young children do show activity in memory-related brain regions when they're encoding experiences. The recordings might exist. The hippocampus might even hold weak traces of them for longer than anyone assumed. But without the retrieval cues, without language, without a self to attach them to, they're essentially unreadable files sitting in storage. Think about what this means. There was a version of you that existed before you had words. A version that experienced sounds, faces, warmth, fear, comfort, and joy intensely every single day, and stored almost none of it in a form your current mind can access. That version of you isn't a separate person. It's the foundation everything else was built on top of. Your earliest attachments, your sense of safety or insecurity, the way your nervous system learned to respond to stress, all of that was shaped during a period you cannot consciously remember at all. And this isn't just an ancient evolutionary glitch either. This same process is still happening in front of you right now if you're around young children. A toddler having what looks like a meltdown over something seemingly trivial isn't being dramatic. They're often experiencing something intensely in a brain that has no language yet to process it and won't remember it later. But the emotional residue, the patterns of comfort and response, those get built into the architecture regardless. It also reframes something about your own adult memory. The next time you can't quite remember why a certain smell makes you uneasy, or why a particular tone of voice makes you feel safe before you've even consciously registered who is speaking, consider this. Some of that might not be retrievable as a memory at all. It might be a trace from before memories, as you know them, even existed. Stored not as a story, but as a feeling, written into your nervous system before you ever had the words to describe it. You cannot remember being born. You cannot remember your first steps or the voice that first said your name, but none of it disappeared. It simply moved into a part of you that doesn't speak in memories at all. It speaks in instinct, in comfort, in the way certain rooms feel safe and certain tones feel wrong long before you can explain why.